Over the past 10 years or so, there's been increasing levels of propaganda about SMRs. We read frequently claims that they are cheaper and easier to build, and because of that, they are less likely for the cost and time to run over, as so often happens with large reactor projects. And this will mean that they are easier to finance because they're cheaper and they're less risky than large reactors. We are also told they are safer. People talk about them being meltdown proof, walkaway safe. We're told they will produce less waste than large reactors. Because they're smaller, they will be easier to site, and there is talk perhaps of siting them at where old coal-fired power stations have been, and they will create large numbers of new jobs. As a result of this, there is a widespread impression that large numbers of SMRs are being ordered all around the world. And at a Financial Times conference in a couple of weeks, the material for one session talks about 65 SMRs under construction worldwide. In fact, there are only 3 SMRs under construction worldwide. All are prototypes, one in China, one in Russia, one in India, so they are not relevant to Europe, the Czech Republic. And no design of a small modular reactor is yet available to order. No design has completed a full safety review by an experienced and credible regulator. And until this is done, we won't know whether the design is licensable, or more precisely, we won't know what safety features are needed to make the design licensable, and what the cost of the whole plant will be. People talk about preliminary safety reviews, but these don't have any real value. All they say is that in principle, the design is licensable. And of course, in principle, any design is licensable, provided you add enough safety features. So what are small modular reactors? It actually covers such a wide range of sizes and technologies that the term is not really very meaningful. The IAEA talks about SMRs as reactors of between 30 and 300 megawatts of electricity. Reactors that are smaller than that are often called microreactors. In terms of technology, you can divide them into 3 categories. The first category, and the one relevant to us today, is smaller versions of the dominant existing reactor types. So pressurized water reactors like the PWRs at Dukovany and Temelin, and boiling water reactors, BWRs, the second most common type of reactor worldwide. The second type is technologies that have been around for more than 50 years, but they've only been built as prototype or demonstration plants. For example, fast breeder reactors, high temperature gas-cooled reactors. These prototype and demonstration plants have all been at best problematic. They have not worked well. The third category is reactor designs that have been talked about for a long time, for 50 years or more, but they've never actually been built, even at prototype scale. So an example might be molten salt reactors or lead-cooled fast reactors. Czech Republic is focusing on PWRs and BWRs, and these are at least technically, if not economically proven. So there is at least some chance they will generate electricity reasonably reliably, and they will be available long before the other 2 categories. Although the definition of SMR is 30 to 300, the smallest is about 80 megawatts, and some are larger than 300 megawatts. For example, the Rolls-Royce SMR design is 470 megawatts, which makes it about the same size as each of the reactors at Dukovany. The claims on the costs being lower and the plants being easier to build are based on production line manufacturing of components, modular construction, so that site work is simply bolting together the modules. So most of the plant comes on the back of a lorry, and there is limited work to do at the site itself. The claims on improved safety are down to use of passive safety systems, so that in an accident, natural process rather than engineered systems bring the reactor back under control. So something like convention rather than an emergency core cooling system. Some of the designs are integral, which means that the major systems are all within the reactor vessel, which makes them less vulnerable and allegedly safer. And some of the reactors are built underground and housed underwater, so that that again adds another layer of protection. There are 7 SMR, PWR and BWR designs that have seen significant development, and CHES has signed cooperation agreements with all of them. What those cooperation agreements mean in practice is hard to know. I suspect it doesn't mean much work on the part of CHES. That would be a huge diversion of resources. So let's quickly go through the 4 of them. Let's start with the GE Hitachi BWRX 300. This was announced relatively recently, about 5 years ago, and it's a scaled down version at 300 megawatts of a very large reactor, the 1,500 megawatt ES BWR, has passive safety. This large reactor did get design approval by the US safety authorities, but it was never marketed because it was uneconomic, and it's hard to know why scaling it down would make it cheaper. There is some support for this design from 2 US utilities. There is some interest in Canada, Poland, UK, Estonia and Czech Republic. Preliminary safety reviews are underway in Canada and US, but not a full-scale safety review. If you read the press, you will believe that there are firm orders for 4 reactors of this design in Canada, but these are actually only options that might be made firm if the design receives safety approval. So again, there are very misleading press reports. The next design is the Westinghouse AP300, announced this year. It's a scaled down version at 300 megawatts of the AP1000, which is a 1,170 megawatt reactor. It's the advanced passive 1000. It's a modular design relying on passive safety. 8 of these large reactors were sold. USA, I've said Canada, I should have said China, to USA and China, but all of them suffered major construction delays. They were at least 6 years late, and they were up to 4 times over budget. And 2 of those 8 actually had to be abandoned after 4 years of construction. There isn't much, because it's only recently designed. I'm sorry. As it's only been recently announced, there isn't much interest in it yet. Most of the publicity is on the new scale design, and this dates back 20 years or more, and US government funded research. A company was set up in 2007, and the large US engineering company became the major shareholder 4 years later. It started at 35 megawatts, then it went up to 40 megawatts, then up to 50 megawatts, then up to 60 megawatts, and it's now 77 megawatts. It was originally designed to be built in clusters of 12, but as it's got scaled up, then those clusters have come down, and it's now being offered in clusters of 4 or 6 reactors. It's an integral design relying on passive safety. It's built underground, and it's immersed in a water pool. The 50 megawatt design did go through a comprehensive safety review in the USA starting in 2016, but by the time this process was complete in 2021, the 50 megawatt version had been abandoned, and it had been scaled up by more than 50%. Of course, that's a major change in the design, and the regulatory review is effectively back to start, and the review started earlier this year. There is one relatively firm project, the Utah Associated Municipal Power System project, which was announced in 2016 as 12 50-megawatt reactors. It's now become 6 77-megawatt reactors. It's a strange project because the utilities involved are tiny municipal companies, each expecting to buy perhaps 2 or 3 megawatts of the power. Despite this, and despite huge government subsidies, US government subsidies, only about a third of the capacity has been bought. So no order is placed. And if they don't find investors to take up about 2/3 or 3/4 of the capacity, the project will collapse next year. The expected cost has nearly doubled to $91 per megawatt hour. And if you add on the US subsidies, that makes it about $130 per megawatt hour. There is interest in countries like Romania, Jordan, and Canada, but because of the delays with the UAMP system, the share price of NuScale is plummeting, and it's lost 2/3 of its value this year, and I suspect NuScale is in deep trouble. Then we have the next design, which is announced in the Framatome New Ward design, which was announced 4 years ago. This is twin reactors, 170 megawatts each, passive safety, reactors buried underground and immersed in water. The design is still at a very early stage, and there is a little interest in Finland, France, and the Czech Republic, but again, it's too early for much interest. Then we have the Korean reactor, the KERI. This has been under development for a very long time, 100-megawatt reactor, integral reactor with passive safety, but there doesn't seem much interest outside Saudi Arabia. Not much seems to be happening there, so I think this is probably not a serious contender. I think the history of the Westinghouse AP reactors is interesting, as it shows how ambiguous the reactor vendors are on reactor size. Around 1990, Westinghouse announced the AP600, which is about a 700-megawatt reactor. And they claimed at the time that they had looked for scale economies in large reactors, but found there weren't any. So they scaled it down to 600 megawatts. It was assessed and approved by the US Nuclear Regulatory Commission in 1998, but by then it was clearly uneconomic and it was never marketed. So Westinghouse scaled it up to 1170 megawatts, the AP1000, to improve the economics. It was submitted to the US Nuclear Regulatory Commission in 2002, and although it was only a scaling up of the AP600, it took another 9 years for the NRC to give it approval. All 8 orders, 4 for China, were very expensive. So China scaled up the design again to 1,550 megawatts, the CAP1400, to reduce costs. None of these have been completed yet. Now Westinghouse has decided to scale the AP design down to 300 megawatts. So, it seems whenever the reactors become economic, they either scale them up or they scale them down, and that's supposed to reduce costs. So what are the arguments on scale economy and scale economics? The size of reactors has consistently increased since the 1960s. The first reactors were 200 to 300 megawatts. Now we're up to about 1,700 megawatts. And the scaling up was largely because the economics of the smaller reactors were very poor, and the vendors were looking for scale economies to improve those economics. And at a very simplistic level, you can see what the scale economics are. 1,000 megawatt reactor vessel is going to cost less and weigh a lot less than 5 200 megawatt reactor vessels. The other issue is that the challenge for SMRs is not to be cheaper than large reactors. Large reactors are very uneconomic. Large SMRs have to be cheaper than the alternative low carbon options like renewables, like energy efficiency. There are also claimed savings from factory manufacture, modularization, but those will have to more than counter those lost scale economies. Question that the vendors don't answer is, why are reactors difficult to build to time and cost? Is it because they are large? Is it because they are actually just complex, very difficult pieces of engineering to build? And for example, some of the British reactors were described as Swiss watchmaking on a very large scale. Why would small reactors be less complex than large ones? It can only be if some of the safety features you need for large reactors aren't required on small reactors, which raises issues of licensability. What about production lines and factory manufacture? And the image is clearly, you're meant to conjure up an image of a rolling production line like car manufacture, with cars going down the line, many cars being produced per day, a machine doing a specific piece of welding, for example. But the Rolls-Royce production lines would be designed to produce only 2 to 4 reactors per year. So this is really nothing like the production line as you would imagine it. Production lines are expensive to set up and they're inflexible. And if they're not fully loaded, then you either have to close them or mothball them, and those fixed costs are not being recovered. And if the design needs to be changed, then you need to change the equipment on the production line. There is also the inflexibility, and Rolls-Royce wants to make its first reactor on a production line, because if it's not produced on a production line, we won't know what the economics of production line reactors are. But if you set up a production line and it's only producing 2 reactors a year, by the time the first kilowatt of electricity is generated, at least another 10 or 12 reactors will be in various stages of manufacture. So the British government would be taking a huge gamble on the design being economically and technically viable. It can't just build one and see if it works well. It's going to have to build 12 of them. NuScale is using the opposite approach, and for its first project, it's using traditional one-off fabrication methods. The problem with this is that we won't know what the cost of production line reactors will be. The claims on modularization are also a little bit misleading. All reactors require a mix of factory work and on-site assembly. So the claim for SMRs is simply that the balance will be a little bit more. A small modular reactor is still going to need concrete foundations. It's still going to need cooling water to be connected to the sea or to a lake or to a river. It's still going to need a very large turbine generator, which is going to need to be assembled at the site. The Westinghouse AP1000 is claimed to be modular and factory produced, but that didn't prevent construction of all reactors ordered going badly wrong. So what are my conclusions? Well, reactor vendors always give the impression that their products are much closer to market deployment than they actually are. And you get the impression from them that they could start building these reactors tomorrow. This is very misleading. No SMR has completed a comprehensive safety review. Only 2 of them have actually started a safety review, the NuScale and the Rolls-Royce one, and those are about 3 or 4 years away from completion. And it would be reckless to order an SMR until you've actually got that safety certification. You'll read lots of talk about memoranda of cooperation, letters of intent, etc. But these are also are essentially worthless as indicators of real orders. Producing new reactor designs is risky, expensive, and takes a long time. NuScale has been under development for 20 years. More than $1 billion has been spent on it, including very large amounts of US public money. And all the vendors will be looking for large amounts of public money and guarantees of orders if they're going to proceed with bringing their designs to the point when they can be commercially ordered. The traditional vendors don't have the funds to do this, but without the assurance of strong orders. Westinghouse and Framatome are still emerging from bankruptcy. Scaling down existing designs is a cheaper way to produce the SMR designs, but if the large reactors were uneconomic, why would the small ones be any better? Why would they be any less complex? They would be equally complex, and they would probably be more expensive. New companies like Holtec, startup companies, will need partners and public funding if they're going to develop their designs, because nobody is going to buy a nuclear reactor from a company with no history in producing large nuclear power plants. There are things I could say on waste, safety, and jobs, but perhaps we can leave those to questions. Thank you. I hope that covers everything.